Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of Device Squad and Anexipod. For those who haven't heard, Anexinet is excited to welcome Propellix as the newest member of the Anexinet team. If you are a Device Squad listener, then welcome to the Anexipod, the official podcast for Anexinet. Here on the Anexipod, we talk technology for the enterprise, covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Director of Cloud Solutions at Anexinet. And for those of you that are Anexipod listeners, Device Squad is...
Device Squad. For those of you who are Device Squad listeners, welcome to another episode of Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propellix and Anexinet company. I have to add that now.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It's on our logo and everything.
I saw.
So I'm here in the Anexinet studio, which is a legitimate podcast studio, unlike the barn where I pretend to host a podcast. We're talking into very fancy microphones with the whole desk clips, and we've got real monitors, and there are headphones and all sorts of equipment everywhere.
Yeah, it's we went legit at some point. I was very surprised because it started off as a joke. I'm not gonna lie, we talked about the studio, and I was like, yeah, the studio. Like, it was just a joke, haha. And then one of our marketing people was like, no, seriously, we can set up the studio. I'm like, okay, sure we can. And next thing I knew, they were like, okay, this is the room it's going to be in, and we need to get a couch. And I was like, why do we need a couch? What are we going to be doing in this room?
The couches are very important.
There is a black leather couch for reasons completely unknown.
It's really nice. You want to be very comfortable when you're recording your podcast. I also noticed that you have an on-air sign. That I'm especially jealous of.
Yeah, that was the brainchild of the marketing person. They were like, you need an on-air sign. And then she meticulously picked out exactly which one.
It's gorgeous.
It's really
nice.
It's
like Art Deco.
It is. And it takes a special order light bulb, which I found out when it burned out the first time. And we didn't have any light bulb that would fit it.
Yeah.
So I bought a 3-pack. So we're good for a little bit.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Where I just have to what my on-air sign consists of me doing this, and I'm waving my hands frantically in the air, and that's whenever I see like my wife walk by or the kids or something. That's the signal. Do not come in.
Yeah. So you have to record at home.
Yeah. Well, we have a little separate barn, so I'm able to record in there. But the yard's right there, and the kids are always screaming and playing. So what I did. My strategy for dealing with that is I incorporate them into the podcast whenever
Well, there you go. Just make it on purpose, right?
Yeah, it's totally intentional. We have 4 chickens now.
Okay.
And they've been on the podcast a few times, which is why I was eating chicken and why it was had any significance at all that I was eating chicken in that last episode.
I gotcha. Because you have chickens.
So.
Now, the chickens that you have, those are primarily for egg laying, I assume?
Yeah, I wasn't eating one of those chickens.
Yeah, my neighbors like across the street have 6 chickens, I think, in a coop in like their backyard. And there's a couple other people in my neighborhood that all have chickens.
It's a big, very popular thing to have now.
Yeah,
very trendy.
When we moved in, they came over and they were like, hi, welcome to the neighborhood. Here's a dozen fresh eggs and some muffins that we baked with fresh eggs. And I was like, where am I? What is going on? Like, I moved from a pretty packed, not urban, but like barely suburban area to, more of a pastoral setting. And they're like, here, fresh eggs. I was like, I've made it to the land of milk and honey.
Are you nearby?
Not too, 40 minutes from here. So, yeah, but I mean, north and into like sort of the country hinterlands.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
It's really pretty. Well, so I'm up in Boston, but my family is like ready to move down to Philly.
You don't sound like you're from Boston.
Notice. No, I grew up in Lexington. That's
okay.
Anybody from Lexington will know what I'm talking about. Other people will be like, I don't understand why he doesn't. I can put it on if you want. Would that help?
What, the Boston accent or the Kentucky accent?
The Boston accent. Oh, Lexington, Massachusetts.
Oh, Lexington, Massachusetts. Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. Now, would that help? You want me to talk like
no, it's quite. I mean,
or...
I can lay on the Philly accent, but we're trying to keep it American neutral, I think. Is that?
Yeah.
I don't know what the technical voice is for that.
Yeah.
Lexington, Mass.
Midwest.
Okay. Midwest.
That's
Is
the
that
Midwest. Although that's anyway. All right. So did I? I thought I had a point.
Maybe. It's not important. So, Steve,
Yeah.
my first question for you is,
What am I doing here?
who are you, and what would you say you do around here?
Yeah. So what I do for Propellix, I sort of wear a lot of hats. I'm a UX guy. I'm a mobile strategist. I'm a writer. So I do all the copy editing, anything that goes out on the site or in emails or in marketing materials comes through me first. A lot of our team is down in Guadalajara, so it's kind of essential that somebody looks at it first. So that's me, and that's what I'm going to be doing for you guys primarily. I'm going to be doing a lot of the marketing, taking over a lot of that stuff.
Okay.
And a lot of the copy editing, and so I don't know what the plan is around the podcasts. If we're Propellix and Anexinet company is going to stick around for at least the next 12 months, and then I don't know, we're all going to be like assimilated into the Borg.
I actually don't know what the plan is for long-term assimilation, and we're probably not even allowed to speculate on that.
Yeah, probably not.
But no, that's cool. So is your background from the UX and like design side, and then you fell into like the copy editing as just a consequence of being at Propellix?
Kind of some of each. I sort of got started in technology when I have an MFA in fiction.
Okay.
And then I went out to LA to try to get a job in comedy, and I wound up working for National Lampoon for like a bunch of years.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, people have heard of them. People tend to dislike them at this point, but we tried to be funny. But we built a website for the Lampoon.
Okay.
And so that's how I got more into technology. But I already had some tech background, so just kept it going, and then it turned into like UX, which wasn't even really a field back then.
Right. That is a field that did not exist 10 years ago.
Did not exist. So I got lucky. I did not have to go to school for it. I went to the School of Hard Knocks.
Hard UX?
Yeah. I learned my UX on the street.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah, baseball bats and banners.
I don't have a degree. I don't need a piece of paper to tell me that I can tell you how to design your website or your mobile app.
See, UX design to me is like magic because I am not good at that at all. Like if you need someone to like script something out or maybe do a little code editing, like I can do that. I'm there. If you need someone to like organize something and make it look pretty, definitely talk to somebody else.
Well, okay. Here's where developers make the mistake every time. That developers are thinking too much. That's the problem.
I will let all the developers know to stop thinking.
This is a great subject for this podcast. Where I think we're onto something here.
Okay.
So, because the key with UX is to just imagine that the dumbest person in the world is using your product.
Okay.
So, and then just design for that dumb person. So assume that if there's something that can go wrong or could be misinterpreted, that it will be misinterpreted.
Right.
So everything has to be as simple and as clear as possible.
That's interesting because when you're writing code or scripts, you always have to validate the input and validate the output and assume that something is going to go wrong. And a UX design sounds, very similar, eerily similar in that regard.
Yeah.
Trust but verify.
Sometimes what I'll do, if I want to really verify something, if I'm like testing an app that one of the other designers has built or a prototype or something, I will literally get drunk and then try to use the app. And that's the test. Can I use the app when I'm drunk? And if I can use it successfully, then I know that the UX is okay.
See, my thought would immediately is like give it to my 6-year-old. And if he can use it,
no.
But he's probably more advanced than some of the worst users.
Exactly. That's
so
the wrong approach.
Maybe what I should really do is hand it to
your dad,
my dad, and be like, "Can you navigate this?"
That's right.
Because unsurprisingly, he switched from Android to iPhone about 2 years ago because he found Android too frustrating to understand.
Oh, if he's frustrated with Android. I don't think that iPhone is any easier to use than
but the big difference
Android.
there is that they had the Genius Bar and the sessions at the Apple Store that he went to, and they like showed him how to do things.
Yeah.
So maybe that wasn't as much UX as the fact that they just have someone who will hold your hand through everything.
Yeah.
And like that would have been me otherwise. So thank you, Apple, for that.
Yeah, we are definitely all cursed with being tech support for our parents. That's something we all have in common.
Extended family, really.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a family gathering, someone will corner me and be like, "You're a computer guy. I'm having trouble with my like DVD player," and I'm like, "Sure, let's go."
For me, it's always printer issues. It's constant with my dad having printer issues.
Yeah.
He cannot remember how to cut and paste. That's his level of savviness.
Wow.
Can't remember how to do it every time. I must have shown him at least a dozen times, literally, how to cut and paste on the screen on a laptop.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, it seems like he would be a good tester for UX.
He would be great, but he has a flip phone, and he's not switching it around.
I gotcha. So I think it's probably a balance, though, because like you don't want the UX, you don't want to not be able to support your more advanced users, but you also want the most basic of users be able to accomplish whatever their goal is.
Right. Well, no user would ever complain about simplicity. That's the thing. The other thing is consistency is really important.
Okay.
That's the other thing we see a lot. Lack of consistency from desktop to mobile.
I know. Like, so I cut my teeth in IT doing help desk, and so help desk is where you get all the people who can't figure something out. Even though it's blindingly obvious, you get calls. So working first-tier help desk taught me to not assume anything when someone calls in. Because I literally had stuff like, okay, I need you to restart the computer. Can you turn it off and back on? Sure. And I'd hear them, like, push the button and then be like, okay, it's back on. And only, like, 3 seconds had passed. And I'd be like, did you push the button on the screen or on the tower? Because most of them would just turn off the screen and be like, oh, I restarted the computer.
Right.
No, you didn't.
Right.
Or is it plugged in was a question that I asked so many times, and trying to describe to them the correct cable. I mean, fortunately, like everything's USB now, so it's like, okay, just make sure all your USBs. But back then, it was like you had a serial cable and a PS2 cable, and you had the power cable and like maybe a modem cable. It was like so many different cables, and trying to describe to them what connector was what.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's like
that
bad
been terrible.
in real life UX design.
Yeah.
The back of a computer was like a horrifying mystery for most people.
I remember the SCSI connector.
Oh God,
I remember
the
those
72-pin SCSI.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was excited when they went down to mini SCSI. That was like a big deal.
Yeah.
And you had to chain them. And I go far back enough that I remember having to manually assign SCSI numbers to the devices.
Yeah.
It had like each one had a little incrementer on it, and it was 0 through 7, and you could have more than 8 devices on a SCSI chain.
Yeah.
Oh God! Wow. Now.
Wow, we're going back a ways.
We really are. So
it's getting nostalgic on the Device Squad and Anexinet.
I feel like we should
podcast
be,
from
like
Propellix.
Drinking some beers and just talking about the good old days.
Yeah.
Though they weren't that good.
No, they were lousy. They were lousy. So the other thing about UX that I want to mention is I think that, I mean, if you think about the evolution of software, I remember back in like the 90s and so forth, there was just sort of this attitude of where like the more features, the better. And nobody really worried about the layout or the UX at all. And now we're at a point where, especially with, I think mobile kind of led this charge of simplicity because it insisted on simplicity. It requires, you've got this tiny screen, so you really have to be focused on like a single task at a time. So there's so much more attention that needs to be paid towards the organization of the interaction.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And the funny thing is that I feel like it's almost like it works this way with language too. And somebody will use highfalutin language. They do it because they think that it sounds impressive, you know. So it's kind of the same way with software. If there's more features and so forth, and it looks complex, the thinking was that that's going to be somehow more impressive. And the funny thing is that language works the same way. From a UX perspective, language, say like the language of buttons, the language of instructive copy, the language of alerts, anything like that, it all has to be very simple, common language.
Right.
You want it to be as easy for the user to understand as possible. It's a very simple premise. And so it's the same way with the interactions. They just need to be simple. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
Right. That language thing sort of triggers something with me because I got my degree in computer science, but I had to take a number of like creative writing, and I didn't have to, but I chose to because I liked that stuff, and some writing analysis and film analysis. And in some cases, people really just use big words to use big words.
Right.
Whether or not they actually move your point forward or make anything clear, I think you can use highfalutin language in a precise way to convey a complex thought in a more nuanced way. But that takes a measure of like self-editing and knowing that this is exactly what the word means, and I'm intending to say it, and I'm trying to convey this really complex idea to you, so I have to use this terminology.
Yeah.
But sometimes I would read like some texts, and it became painfully obvious that the author was just using as many big words as they could possibly fit in, and it didn't make their point any more poignant, if you will.
Yeah.
It just muddied everything and made it really hard to like parse what they were saying.
Right. That's exactly right. And the same way an interface gets muddied by too much interaction.
Right.
And there's I have no argument that there are certainly great words that are big words that are amazing words and should be used. But when you're talking about software, there's rarely any call for a large word like that describes a complex concept.
I find a few, but they're mostly in the vein of programming, where you're trying to describe a programming concept, but that's not something that really the end user ever sees.
Right.
That's like, so if I'm trying to talk about immutable concepts, or what's the other one that I run into a lot? There's a lot of big terms out there, but they're all really reserved for the programmers talking to each other, not you talking to the end user.
Exactly. So I've been brought on. I've been tasked with rewriting a lot of the Anexinet copy on the website and so forth to try to bring it more down to earth and try to describe Anexinet services in some more common language and things like that, which is
yeah, I think in a lot of cases, and I know because I wrote some of it, but some of it was written by our engineers, and they have trouble distilling down their thought from where they're coming from in a very technical way, explain that to someone who's more of a lay person. And I think it really takes someone who's completely outside of it, like you, to come in and go,
I'm the
okay,
drunk.
That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Explain to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Right, exactly.
And
or my dad.
Or your dad. And keep explaining it to me in simpler and more clear terms until it makes sense.
Right.
That's good. That sounds good to me.
Yeah, because most of your clients and most of Propellix and the Anexinet company's clients are like on the business side, and they don't understand that stuff.
Right.
And in fact, what we on our blog started out being fairly technical, and the feedback we got was that it was too technical. So we just kept sort of broadening the scope of the topics, and the same thing. That's why our podcast, Device Squad, never gets super technical. I'd rather talk about subjects that everybody's interested in, like Bitcoin or like tools for autism and things like that.
Right. Keep it somewhat conceptual.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, so it's true that Anexinet's client base, a large portion of it is the business side, but I would say it's probably 50-50 between business and like traditional IT operations.
Yeah.
So for those folks, we can get a little more down in the weeds about things. And that's so portions of the podcast, especially the Anexipod, sometimes I'll do a deep dive down something, but that's clearly called out in the title. So if you want to skip that episode because you don't care about storage spaces, direct, and Windows Server, totally cool. Yeah. Skip that one. But then we have a whole other one that's just talking about new patterns for designing infrastructure. That one stays a little more high level. You don't need to know a whole lot of the nitty-gritty details to understand the higher level concepts that are behind it.
Right.
But yeah, I do sometimes struggle like getting a high enough concept because I spend so much time down in the weeds, you know?
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. So I got to elevate that a little bit.
So you're a developer.
No.
Oh.
I'm not a developer.
So what is your title? Let me interview you for a little bit.
Okay. Sure. So my official title is Director of Cloud Solutions.
Okay.
I would say that I am kind of a combination. I'd like a product manager, more or less. So all the things that go in that, like the sales enablement, development of solutions, doing some pre-sales work, doing some marketing work, helping write copy. Like, you know, a product manager has to wear about 12 different hats.
Yeah.
So even though I have a director title, I don't direct anybody but myself, and I'm basically a product manager. But we didn't have that as a thing prior to me. So I think internally we're called solution leaders, which again really doesn't capture the breadth and scope of what we're responsible for. But really, I'm responsible for helping accelerate our cloud practice, and that is mostly on the cloud infrastructure and software as a service side of things. We do have, the whole separate app development team, and I work with them when there's an opportunity to create a cloud native application, so I can help advise them or help in the pre-sales process to talk to the infrastructure side of things. But one of my counterparts, Dan Kelly, is really good on doing the pre-sales for cloud native applications. So the two of us might tag team a pre-sales opportunity because between the two of us, we've got all the knowledge to cover the full stack. Sure. So he can go into like the code and how you might architect an application using some native services on AWS or something, and then I can go, okay, to support that, you're going to need this infrastructure. You're going to need to be able to back it up, to monitor it appropriately, to secure it for compliance, and here's how all those things are going to work. So between the two of us, we can get something together, right? My background is, like I said, I started on help desk, and then moved up to like a desktop admin. So I was helping like deploy desktops, troubleshoot desktops, and then slowly started creeping into, standing up and configuring server-grade applications and managing domain controllers and Exchange servers and all that kind of good stuff. And then just kept moving up in that realm to becoming a real systems administrator. And then at a certain point, I kind of hit a ceiling on that and moved over into the consulting world because I wanted to keep working with whatever was new and interesting. And the problem was most companies have that sort of like 3-year buying cycle. So everything's boring. Not boring, but everything's the same for about 3 years until you get to buy that one new shiny thing. And then you have that new shiny thing and you get to play with it for 6 months. And then that becomes the old boring thing and you have to wait another, however long for the next shiny thing.
Right.
When you work in consulting, you're working with the new shiny thing all the time.
All the time.
Which is both exciting and somewhat exhausting at times.
Exactly. It's really it's the same. We build enterprise apps for large enterprises primarily, and we do a lot of like prototyping. Our initial engagement will involve strategy, ideation, and wireframing and prototyping, and we do it all in like 2 weeks. That's kind of like our claim to fame. We'll give you a prototype in 2 weeks. And that alone is pretty exhausting. But then when on top of that, you need to keep up with all the advancements of the latest iOS or Android OS, and then all the latest usability modalities or, whatever the newest thing is. Like right now it's like sort of animating the UI so that things come, everything can be on one screen and elements just sort of move around as you interact with them. So they sort of hide and show and hide,
right?
Which makes sense. It's great, but so what's next? I don't know what's next, but we'll see, and I'll have to learn it. So,
yeah. That's just, from a UX perspective, you have to see what's trending and what's actually useful versus what's just a fad.
Right.
And then sort of figure out what makes sense for your enterprise customers.
Right. Yeah. Right. Skeuomorphism was a fad.
So I think I know what that means.
That's a big word.
But let me just try it. So is that when something in the UI mimics a real-world item?
Right.
Like if it's a notepad, it will look like a legal rule notepad.
Right.
So Apple was really big on that for a while.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. That was kind of like their big differentiator at first. Like things looked like they were made out of wood or metal or like and then Android actually kind of beat them too, the flat design. And then Apple kind of followed suit, and it made sense because really the device is the interaction,
Right.
The medium is the message basically. So why are we trying to make it look like other things? And that made sense, but now we're kind of going back a little bit. Now that with all the animation, there's design is kind of coming back a little more. You'll see more colors and shadows and things like that where because menus need to be differentiated from other menus a little more. So it kind of ebbs and flows.
Right, it's the pendulum, right?
It's a real fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's the same in all technologies, I find. So, for a while, the pendulum in infrastructure swings from everything being disaggregated and decentralized to everything being highly centralized and highly aggregated, and then it swings back. So, like way back, we had mainframes, and everything was highly centralized. Yeah. And then the PC revolution hit, and everything became kind of decentralized to a certain degree. And then we kind of went through another centralization when they started doing VDI deployments. So all the data and the processing went back to live up in your data centers, and you just had kind of a dumb terminal or a mobile device that was just giving you a screen into what was running in the data center. Yeah. And now I feel like we're headed back into that decentralization where more of the software is actually running on the end devices because dealing with that latency is no good for at least consumer-grade stuff. Like more than, was it like 500 milliseconds of latency is enough to make a user abandon an app.
Yeah. Users they have no patience at all.
No, brutal.
No tolerance. They're not gonna. It's like that old Louis C.K. bit where he says like everything's amazing and nobody's happy.
Because it could be more amazing.
Yeah, I get it. People are complaining about a technology that they just learned existed 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. But they have an idea of how it should function. Or any minor inconvenience is enough of an excuse to talk about why it stinks, right?
But what about the cloud? Does the cloud count as like a mainframe kind of
centralized? So that was sort of the centralization that started to happen was when we had our mill servers and various applications deployed in our little data centers, and we were all kind of happy about it, but it was a lot of management. And then the cloud did this thing where it kind of offered SaaS, software as a service, and now sucked all that stuff up into their big cloud data centers, which is great from a management standpoint. But now I need a way to have real-time interaction with those services. So my devices, my laptop, my desktop, my mobile device, has to be able to run that stuff locally to a certain degree. And then you also have all the IoT stuff happening. So all of these edge devices that need to be closer to an endpoint to collect information. So like a self-driving car. That thing has, I don't even know how many sensors on it. And it needs to make real-time decisions based off of information that's streaming in from those sensors. It can't send something up to the cloud and wait.
Right.
It has to make a split-second decision. Is that a person or a deer? Do I have to stop? Like, what's going on in this intersection? And, I mean, most of those cars have, like, their fail-safe is to just stop and wait.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. But it really does need to be able to process all that stuff locally. So you're seeing sort of a kind of a decentralization of information and processing. And also as the global footprint of digital expands, because right now, was it like 2 billion people have internet and mobile to a certain degree? There's still another 5 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
When those people start getting wired in or wirelessly hooked into the ecosystem, it's probably going to be on a mobile device. and you're going to need to put an endpoint close enough to them that they're actually getting some performance out of that. They can't send stuff back to the U.S. when they're sitting somewhere in Uganda waiting for a response from a web server. You need something that's like some sort of endpoint that's much closer to them to be able to process that information.
Wasn't Zuckerberg going to take care of that? Didn't he have a plan to put servers on hot air balloons or satellites?
So Google had a project called Project Loon.
Yeah.
And that was putting network devices on hot air balloons.
Oh, okay.
So it was like weather balloons, basically. And with, I guess some motors to them so they could kind of place themselves appropriately. Zuckerberg was talking about, like, low Earth orbit satellites or, like, gliders that would stay really high up. But that solves the providing them with wireless service. But it doesn't actually solve the problem of getting the content closer to them. And that's why we have stuff like Akamai and other CDNs that put the most commonly accessed data closer to the user. But I know, like, all of those services are getting better and better at putting dynamic content closer to the user. Because right now, like, a lot of them just do static content. So, the images on a website will all be cached locally. But if something's dynamically generated, like a form or a complex UI, like you were talking about, like, that has to be rendered back at the server farm and then sent across the wire. That takes too long. So instead, you see the rise of stuff like Node.js, where it just sends you the JavaScript and the content, and then it's rendered locally on the device. So that's another, like, swing of centralization, decentralization through JavaScript.
So what are we seeing now for cloud usage? Is it, like, primarily for, like, backup so that there's just a redundancy of data? And
I see a couple trends. Startups tend to go all in on cloud and not have a local data center. They might have, like, something in their office that, handles file and print, or maybe just print. But everything else is running in the cloud through a SaaS, if possible, through infrastructure as a service, if you must, sort of. So, like, SaaS is always going to be cheaper if you can use that, and less work for your admins to deal with, or your ops people. But sometimes you do need some sort of infrastructure, so that's where, like, AWS and Azure kick in. For enterprises, usually they dip their toe in because a developer swiped a credit card and started deploying stuff in AWS, and then the enterprise finds out and they're like, oh, well, okay, I guess we're already there. We should put some other stuff up there. So they're slowly deciding whether or not being in the data center business has anything to do with their core capabilities. And the answer more often than not is no. Running a data center is not core to our business. If you're, I don't know, if you're a carpet cleaning service, running data centers is not core to your business of cleaning carpets. So why have a data center or a server closet and an IT guy who manages all that hardware? It probably doesn't make sense. So, use SaaS where you can, infrastructure if you must, and innovate around your core competency of being really good at cleaning carpets and not being able to back up servers in your little data closet.
Right. I had one episode about Amazon Lambda.
Ooh, Lambda's cool.
Yeah.
Serverless.
It's amazing.
Which,
unbelievable.
I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that engineers are pedantic. Horribly so. So the first thing they say is, well, there's servers somewhere. And it's like, yes, we know.
Right.
Everybody move on. It wasn't a great name, but it's what we have.
Right.
And it's called serverless.
Right.
But I mean, no, serverless is really cool. It allows for very interesting application design patterns. It doesn't fit in well to old school enterprise applications. So your ERP system is not ready to go serverless.
Okay.
Your CRM system, well, you might be using SaaS for that, like Salesforce or something. But like your manufacturing system is not ready to go serverless because you bought it from a vendor and they did a very traditional, like, 3-tier app. And it's barely even ready to be virtualized, let alone moved into a cloud native thing.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're dealing with. Is we've got these enterprises that have these applications that were written 20 years ago with that paradigm in mind.
Yeah.
And now they want to modernize that, and there's no easy way to do it. So, like, the least painful way that we've seen is if you have to get to the cloud, let's do a lift and shift, meaning we'll just clone your VMs basically and move them to infrastructure as a service in Azure AWS. Okay, boom, you're in the cloud now. Now, if you want, and you have the in-house development skill to do it, you can start peeling back layers of that application and putting them into cloud-native services. So maybe you have a reporting element to your application. And it's using SQL reporting services. Maybe there's a better reporting platform. Maybe you could use Power BI to do all your reporting. So let's look at stripping that portion of the application out and using software as a service instead.
Sure.
But now that you have it up in the cloud, at least it's really close to those other services, and the integration is easier.
Sure. So let me just backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
How did you get into the podcasting business, so to speak? Now you have a great voice for radio.
Well, thank you, sir.
Is that just
That's just
coincidental
luck.
or
It's pure luck? So, and I would ask you the same question, but I will answer since you asked me first. I got into podcasting, what year is it? About 12 years ago, I found out about this podcast thing because I was just looking for interesting things to listen to, and I came across Podiobooks. I don't know if you remember this. This is going way back.
Is that an app? What is that?
It was a website where people were recording their audiobooks, like authors would record their book as an audiobook and publish it in serial fashion as a podcast.
Oh.
So I discovered that, and I discovered there was another one, and I can't even remember the name of it now. There was like a sci-fi podcast that was covering some of the sci-fi stuff I was watching at the time. So I was like, ooh, I think it was called This Week in Sci-Fi. It was like very straightforward. So I was like, oh, podcasting is a thing. This is really interesting. People are telling stories. I really like music. I should start a music podcast where I will play, 5 or 6 songs every week, talk about what's going on in the music world a little bit, at least the music that I listen to, and maybe someday I'll interview somebody. So I got all the gear. I started up the podcast. I had a website, the whole 9 yards. I think I got about 12 episodes in, and then I pod faded.
You pod faded?
I pod faded.
Is that, I've never heard that term before. Is that the burnout that happened?
Yes. So most podcasts don't make it past like episode 4.
Oh, yeah.
So I made it a little further than that, but like life happened.
Yeah.
And podcasting wasn't at the top of my priority list.
Is that what happened?
No, but I met my future wife.
Oh, yeah.
So suddenly I had a lot less free time because we were in the courtship portion of things. So I stopped doing the podcast, but I always had in the back of my mind, that was a lot of fun. I'd like to do that again. Once I had been at Anexinet for a few years, I started thinking, it'd be really cool if Anexinet had a podcast to talk about all the awesome stuff we do and all the awesome stuff going on in the tech world. I'm going to start that. So I just literally grabbed the mic and told the marketing group, I'm like, I'm going to start a podcast. It's going to be called Nexapod. Let's do this. And they're like, but we don't even know how to set up, where do you want to post it? And I was like, we'll figure it out. Let's just do it.
Yeah. That's essentially what happened to me with Propellix.
Yeah.
Since I'm doing a lot of marketing, it just occurred to me like, well, why don't we do a podcast? I mean, we have the blog. We have webinars. We have white papers. We have all these things. Podcast just makes sense.
Right.
It's fairly easy to do. And
it's one more like channel for you to broadcast your message on, basically.
Yeah. And I had some experience just production-wise with editing and so forth. And that again goes back to the Lampoon, because since it was a website, we were producing video and audio content. We were like working in like Flash and Real Player and like
Flash. Yeah.
Remember those? Oh
I spent some time in the trenches with Flash.
Yeah.
So because I was involved in music, pre like Facebook, MySpace.
Yeah.
You had to design websites for bands, and if they wanted music to play on their website, the easiest way was to build a music player in Flash.
Yeah,
but then all of them wanted it skinned for the site or for the band. So I spent a lot of time in FLA files.
Oh, yeah.
And doing action scripts.
Oh, yeah.
Which was awful to debug.
Yeah. It's nice that that's sort of all done now.
Yeah.
But so are you a musician also?
I was in several bands as a front person. So I think that all kind of feeds back into it too. Like I'm comfortable in front of people and being like the voice of something.
Yeah.
So I think that fed back into it as well.
Because I'm a drummer, so I'm in bands as a back person.
Okay.
And I'm a comedian, so that's why I'm comfortable in front of a microphone.
Okay, so have you done stand-up?
Yeah, I've been doing stand-up forever.
Wow,
So,
really?
Yeah.
I have heard that the first few times, actually not just the first time, but the first like year of stand-up, you're going to bomb like constantly, and you just have to develop a thick skin around that and just understand that you will get better eventually.
Well, it depends. I mean, unless you're a guy like Stephen Wright and you have a really new delivery, or somebody like Sam Kinison or Rodney Dangerfield, somebody like that.
Yeah.
Where what they're doing is so innovative that, because I don't think those guys really had like a break-in period. But if you're, an average kind of joke comedian, yeah, that's pretty much true. Because you kind of like spend the first year kind of learning to get out of your own way.
Okay.
You become a different person on stage, and you think that you need to. It's kind of hard to articulate, but like ideally, and Woody Allen said this, that an audience really just wants to like you. If you're likable, then that's half the battle right there.
Okay.
It's not so much about the material as it is about you being likable as a person. So when you go out there and you're just beginning, you think, God, this material has to be brilliant or it's just not going to go over. But that doesn't happen. Like, you can have the best material, but you go out and you're just not likable because maybe you've come across as being like arrogant or pretentious or whatever, and the audience just decides they don't like you.
Right.
The material can be genius, but you're not going to get any laughs because they're no longer on your side.
Right. So I always thought that when you go to a comedy club, you want to laugh. Like, you're there to laugh.
Sometimes.
It
depends where you are.
If I was going to a comedy club, I'm going there with the intention to laugh. So I want you to get up on stage and tell jokes. I'm rooting for you. I'm like, yeah, I want you to make me laugh because that's why I'm here. I imagine not everybody's
You're
like
a nice. You'd be a great audience.
Okay.
But like Boston audiences are like notoriously brutal.
Okay.
They're super critical. Mm-hmm. And it's which is part of the fun, because Boston and specifically like Cambridge audiences want a comedian that's like super smart, super like progressive. That's the other thing. That's a whole other podcast topic. The idea of where comedy's going, where stand-up's going. But if you're just going to, if you're just like, let's say in the Midwest, I'm going to say, because they're so nice out there, then yeah, I think that effect where people are just there because they want to laugh and they want to have a good time, I think that would probably be a bigger factor,
right,
in a comedian's success.
So obviously, being on stage has given you a certain level of confidence of just speaking in front of people and being comfortable in front of a mic.
Yeah.
So obviously that helps with podcasting.
Yeah, I think so, and just being comfortable with winging it,
Yeah. I know that the first few times that I did podcasts for Anexinet, like, I had everything scripted. Like,
yeah,
the
me too.
Entire podcast was written out, and it took me like days to prepare a podcast. And now, I mean, I come up with a list of questions for the guest because I want to have something there.
Yeah.
But I also feel comfortable letting the conversation just go wherever it's going to. And if we never get back to that list of questions, but it was interesting and informative, that's fine. That's all I need.
That's pretty much exactly the journey that I've had. If
Yeah.
I go back and listen to the first couple episodes, I don't want to. I would.
No, it's painful.
Painful.
I don't recommend it.
Because I think I did the same thing. I think I like scripted everything out, and now we have I will. Do you do a lot of interviews internally with your own guys?
It's a split. So I try to do about half internal and half external.
Yeah.
So people feel like they're getting to know Anexinet, but it doesn't feel like it's just all marketing about Anexinet. I want them to also get like real value through the podcast.
Yeah. Because I try to do that too, and a couple of the strategists will still write out their answers and then read them. So,
I did one that was it was the DevOps podcast, and the two guys that we had internally, one was pretty comfortable. He is in a band. He's like a singer, bass player for a band. So like being in front of a mic in front of an audience is not a big deal to him. But the other guy, very introverted, not comfortable in front of the mic at all. He had written out everything he wanted to say, and he sounded like a robot that was just reading a script.
Sure.
And I was like, dude, just loosen up a little bit. And just no matter what I did to try to shake him loose, he was still just like on the rail. And don't ask me to get off the rail. And I was like, okay, fine. You do your thing. And, we'll try to spice it up between the dialogue of the other two of us a little bit.
That's exactly what I did. I brought in other strategists. I said, you know what? Instead of just let's just bring in we'll make it a forum.
Right.
And we'll bring in the other guys who are just going to horse around.
Yeah. Yeah, because you need that level of levity. People don't want a textbook read to them. But maybe it's a really funny textbook. I don't know.
But I did make sure to get back to what the strategist had written out and to make sure to get back to his questions and let him get everything out. Because he had a lot of valuable things to say.
Yeah. It's just elaborating on those points a little bit on the fly to make it still feel like it's a conversation.
Right. Yeah.
My favorite podcasts, and I don't know if you listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to entirely too many, probably.
Yeah.
My favorite podcasts are generally the ones where it feels like you're just eavesdropping on a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, like Pod Save America, I would say, is one that's like that.
Okay, let me put that on the list of podcasts.
Oh, yeah, that's... what's the dude's name on Pod Save America? Shoot.
Is that the old MTV VJ?
It's the guy that he's a scriptwriter for Obama.
Oh, okay.
I
don't know this one at all.
I don't think he is anymore. I'm gonna look it up. Am I allowed to Google things?
You can Google whatever you want, or you can Bing it. Not that anybody actually does that, but
Bing it. Yeah, how is Bing still? How are they still around? I don't know.
Bing is still a thing.
Work?
I don't know anybody who actively uses it that doesn't work for Microsoft.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I attend a lot of Microsoft type events, and 5 years ago, if someone from Microsoft had brought a Mac to a presentation, like they would be taken out in the hallway and talked to. Like that would now, like most of the presenters I saw at the last Microsoft event were running either Linux or Mac for their desktop OS, and they were using open source tools. But the one thing that they still do is they still use Bing if they have to search something, because I guess like the Bing search team has not gotten the message, and they're just like, no, you have to use Bing if you're doing a presentation. So they're like, and we're going to Bing it. It was like, okay.
Like, wait, what? Oh, right.
That's still a thing.
Yeah.
I think Bing has a lot of power behind it in terms of its capabilities to be a search engine.
Yeah.
But I think it has the only future it has is something like how Foursquare moved from. Foursquare was a front-end app that people used for a certain period of time, and then they moved into being sort of a back-end for a lot of other apps. So they provide back-end services for location data and ratings and all that kind of stuff, but they're not front-facing to the client anymore. And I could see Bing powering other things with its search technology without actually being a front-facing app that people use.
Yeah. I did not know that about Foursquare. That's very interesting. Are you the mayor of anything?
The mayor?
Wasn't that their thing? Wasn't that their big thing? Wasn't Foursquare the app where check in?
They were. I barely used it.
Yeah.
Like, I just wasn't real big on that whole thing.
If you check in a certain amount of times, then you become the mayor.
Yeah, that was definitely their thing.
Yeah, that was really...
Now they just power I think Grubhub uses them on the back end and a whole bunch of other ones.
Oh, that was smart.
The only reason I know that is because I listened to the A16Z podcast. And that was one of the roundtables they did was about location services and the future of how that works with apps and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys from Foursquare was there, and I was like, "Oh, I thought they weren't a company anymore." And he's like, "No, we're actually extremely profitable. You just don't see us anymore."
Right. So Pod Save America is Jon Favreau, who was the scriptwriter for Obama.
Favreau, not the director of Iron Man. Favreau.
And John Lovett. Those are the two main guys. And I think this guy Favreau is actually from my town, Winchester.
Oh, okay. Look at that.
Strangely enough. And so I listened to that one, and I listened to Radio Lab, which is just amazing.
I love Radio Lab.
But a very different thing, not the same of just guys hanging out.
It can be they can be conversational, but it's obviously a very well produced podcast and scripted to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So when Jad and when they're just sort of talking, Robert.
Robert.
When Jad and Robert,
Krulwich.
yes, when they can start rolling on a topic and it's obviously not scripted, but then they go back into the produced and scripted portions. So it's like, okay, and they're obviously slicing and dicing whatever they recorded after the fact.
Yeah.
So
because the sound effects that they throw in are amazing,
and there's no way they did that
production.
live.
Right.
So it's nice to have a mix. I just like I said, I don't know if you do this. I listen to most podcasts about 1.5 speed.
Oh, I don't. But that's a good idea.
It started with audiobooks because I would listen to audiobooks at like 1.25, 1.5 speed. And then the podcast player I used added a speed option. And so I just bumped everything up to 1.5 with the exception of Song Exploder. That's the only one I listen to at regular speed.
What is that? I don't...
That is a podcast where the host has on an artist who obviously wrote a song, and they will bring like the masters with them and walk the host through the process of recording and developing the song. It's really interesting, but you can't listen to that sped up because it ruins all the listening of the music. So that one's like, okay, that has to be normal speed, but everything else I'm like, boop, 1.5 speed, go.
That's great.
I don't know if it's great, but let's get through more podcasts.
It sounds like we should be probably bringing it around to some kind of a relevant topic to our whatever our topic was.
We had a topic
to begin with.
Okay.
So it's great to be here at the. No, it's going to be exciting. It's for me. There's a little bit of there's going to be a little bit of a break-in period and a learning curve and so forth, trying to figure out what it is that you guys do.
I agree.
And trying to work out how to manage all the new tasks that I feel like my workload is basically about to double.
Your workload that was already running at 200% is now 400%.
Yeah,
I know that feeling.
So that'll be interesting.
Well, I mean, I think it's good for us to have to articulate what we do to someone who's not familiar with it, because that helps us refine how we think about it.
Yeah.
So that's important to us and to you. But, I'm excited to see what comes out of those conversations and how Anexinet and Propellix and Anexinet company will help clients and modernize their applications and embrace the future of technology.
Yeah, I think it's a great marriage. I think we have a lot to offer on the strategy side, on the mobile strategy side, and on the marketing side and the design side.
Right.
And you guys have a lot to offer in the
I hope so.
Cloud and
infrastructure
services.
And we've got some
products.
pretty deep app dev resources too, and we've got the analytics team. So I think there's a lot of cross-pollination that's going to happen.
All right, let's shake on it.
Let's shake on it. Yes. All right. It's nothing like visual cues for an audio medium. All right, and with that is our show with Anexipod and Device Squad. Thank you to the marketing team for helping us pull this together. Thanks to Anexinet and Propellix, and Anexinet Company, for helping produce this podcast. If you're looking for more content, you can check out the sister podcast Buffer Overflow that I run with my co-host Chris Hayner, where we discuss new and interesting news in the IT sphere. You can find out more about me and what I'm up to on Twitter at Ned1313 or on my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.